You're listening to episode 3 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness researchers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Dr. David Black joins us to speak about Mindfulness Research Monthly. Mindfulness has seen a great deal of attention in the media lately. There are articles online, in printed media like Time magazine, and even a new magazine recently started to cover this topic called, appropriately, Mindful. As practitioners and teachers, we're often faced with some questions about this mindfulness thing we do, as it becomes more visible during this transition into mainstream culture. It helps for us to have scientific evidence to share about what's going on neurologically, and not just rely on our own impressions and anecdotes about what we're experiencing for ourselves. Contemplative practices are very personal, but our shared biology makes this a practice many people can do, and having a single place to go which collects the science of mindfulness is invaluable as we learn and share. Dr. David Black is Assistant Professor of Preventative Medicine at the University of Southern California Keck School of Medicine. He is the author of more than 25 peer-reviewed publications, including articles in leading journals such as the Journal of the American Medical Association Pediatrics, Journal of Adolescent Health, Pediatrics, Journal of American Academy of Dermatology, and Psychoneuroendocrinology. He is the founder of Mindfulness Research Guide, and editor of Mindfulness Research Monthly, a web-based dissemination bulletin informing the latest advances in the science of mindfulness. Our guest today is Dr. David Black, founder of Mindfulness Research Guide. David, welcome to Present Moment.
Thank you so much, Ted. It's nice to be here.
So tell us a little bit about the history of research in mindfulness. It's very early on in those stages, and give us a little bit of a preview of what that arc has been.
Wonderful. So I won't talk about the long history of mindfulness that goes back thousands of years, but I will talk about that just specific to the Western empirical investigation of mindfulness and training in mindfulness therapy. So a citation that I can go as far back to in my database, which is I've collected these papers now for 6 years, and I can see that from 1966, there was a paper in Psychiatry and Clinical Neurosciences on the electroencephalographic study of Zen meditation. So back in 1966, maybe even before that, there was some interest in looking at forms of consciousness training and its relevance to health. But when we talk about the mindfulness-based stress reduction lineage, starting with Jon Kabat-Zinn, that's typically what I've produced in the figure on our website. And that started in 1982 with John's first publication, referring to the outpatient program in behavioral medicine written in General Hospital Psychiatry. So that's kind of the big bang point where I begin looking at the research and the lineage that started after that. So after that study written in 1982 and conducted the years before, we see not until about 20 years later, in 2000 and that decade to 2010, there's an increase. You see an interest, but all of a sudden an explosion happening after 2010 and a little bit before. So the history is very recent in terms of the Western concept and the study of it. But we all know it's been much longer before that. But so there is a major interest right now for reasons I'm unsure of to some degree. But people do seem very interested right now in this point in history of how the mind can be transformed, especially to impact the human condition, specifically in this day and age, not just suffering, but the varieties of suffering, including medical conditions and psychiatric conditions. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's a very interesting point to highlight, that all of a sudden there's this booming interest in mindfulness right now, kind of beginning in the late early 2000s, but later in that decade, 2007, 8, and now just really taking off as we are in 2013, being the year with the most scientific publications yet.
David, is there anything in particular that you could point to or just conjecture about what that sudden rise may be attributed to? Were there some events going on in the mindfulness research that contributed to that rise in research papers?
Underlying it all, I would say it's kind of like the process of a wave where you have people from all different areas starting to talk more and more and be interested more and more in a specific area. In this respect, it was mindfulness. And that wave begins to crest over time. You just start bringing more people, having more conferences and symposia, writing papers and giving talks. So it all kind of maybe just came together. There's probably a long history of that wave beginning. Mm-hmm. But it just in the time right now, specifically when the national government is interested in the mind and the brain and how we can transform it. Maybe it's just the kind of global consciousness right now interested in training the mind in well-being, in reducing suffering. So I don't know specifically what happened, but there were also other events that could have pushed it. We started operationalizing in early 2000s, mid 2000s, the construct of mindfulness itself. Ruth Baer and others work, Kirk Warren Brown's work, that we'd say, okay, how do we actually measure this? And that is always very helpful, because then from that we can start developing conceptual models of how we think mindfulness functions on health. And then you can start making the story believable about what's going on when we train people, and then what then should the outcomes be in terms of health and well-being. So I think that was very helpful in the mid-2000s.
Excellent. And there is a chart that you have created tracing the number of studies that have appeared in peer-reviewed articles, journals. And we'll be reproducing that on the episode page for this episode. For folks who are listening, be sure to go check that out. So, Mindfulness Research Guide, when did you start publishing it, and what prompted you to start?
That's a great question. So it began originally as I was finishing up my pre-doctoral work at the University of Southern California, Keck School of Medicine. I was writing a dissertation on the influence of mindfulness, the trait of mindfulness within youth, and how that could possibly impact psychological states and behavioral health outcomes. And as I did this, it was very difficult to pull together all the research, because when you're a pre-doc, you're writing a dissertation, you want to know as much as you possibly can about a topic area.
Yeah.
And I was struggling to pull all of this information together. They were in very diversified journals. Some journals that's very hard to access, very small journals. And I came to the conclusion about after a year that really there's a lot of people interested in this field, and the science is a small was very small at that point. And that something needed to kind of happen to bridge. Like there was a big opportunity for some kind of service here. And it just occurred to me, like how can you pull people together? How can you pull these ideas? And basically the result of all of those thoughts that I was having was a dissemination effort. And basically Mindfulness Research Guide is a research dissemination effort to both collectively pool everything that's being done and then getting that out to people in a way that isn't painful, so saves them time. And that's usually the response I get from a lot of people in the community is like, thank you because you saved me countless hours, and I would have never found this paper weren't for your efforts. So a lot of, basically it's a service to kind of alleviate the burden of having to go through very diversified routes, and kind of streamlining the field in a way where we could kind of get a jump start, like put everyone on the same page and start moving forward. And I hope it's been a contribution and a part of adding to this crest like so many people are. But mostly I conceptualize it as an educational effort, a service effort, and a place where we can really advance this area of science. And so it's very exciting for me.
And it is providing a wonderful resource for people who are interested in what the latest research findings are in how mindfulness impacts the brain and what are some of the therapeutic benefits and outcomes that we're seeing from these interventions. So, David, how do you gather the resources that you present every month?
A lot of sweat. So this system, in the beginning, it was extremely hard because you're trying to go back in time and pull all the old references. At the same time, there's so much new stuff coming out, so you're also collecting that. So getting the system in place was the hardest part. Now it's still hard, but at least now there's a nice system, and I feel pretty caught up to the current year and pretty much the current month, because these searches are done about every 2 weeks. There's an algorithm plus individual searches that goes through 5 different large databases like ISI Web of Knowledge, PubMed, PsycInfo, and others, Google Scholar. So basically going through all those with sets of search terms, including mindfulness, mindfulness-based interventions, and whole tons of other ways to conceptualize mindfulness. And the hardest part after all that, you can get a lot of results, but the most challenging piece is really giving the people what they want, which is papers that are relevant.
Right.
So that is the toughest part, because that takes myself and the very few staff that we have to go through and actually look, especially at the abstract. And if you can't figure it out with the abstract in the body of the paper, to see, is this relevant to what we're talking about? And when I'm at Mindfulness Research Guide, as I said, is the concept of mindfulness as defined by the MBSR lineage and the lineages that came before that. So we have to really narrow it down. So that takes a lot of brain power and time to be like, what do they really mean by this? Because sometimes people will throw out the word mindful or mindfulness in just about any type of paper. So after the ones are placed out of the pile that no longer are relevant, we come down to the golden papers, I like to call them, at the end of the month. And it seems like there's always about, 30 to 40, sometimes maybe even 50, that can come out per month and that are directly relevant to the way we're conceptualizing mindfulness. So by the end of that, that's all pushed into a publication that we call Mindfulness Research Monthly. And then we send it out to our readership, and we hope that everyone can enjoy it.
And we really appreciate your adherence to a certain level of standards in the criteria that you use for finding the papers, because there can be ones that through various mechanisms are just either not good research or just not on topic. So that's one of the greatest benefits I think Mindfulness Research Guide provides, is that you've already done a lot of that vetting so that the people who subscribe to the guide don't have to. So that's a terrific step forward. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, these are all peer-reviewed journal articles that are put in there. We don't add books, even though people have requested it. We really want to focus on good science. So these are all peer-reviewed papers, and everything else we, highly recommend. If people want to go read it, that's okay. But this website is definitely focused on the research and empirical evidence.
So in your own exploration of these studies, what are some of the most interesting areas of research that have captured your own attention?
It's also good. It's so exciting for me. I don't want to pick one area, because there's hype in certain areas, like with every area of investigation. Mm-hmm. Some people really like the neuroscience. Some people really like the applied focus of what this can do with people with certain medical ailments. So no one area has just made me feel like, oh, this deserves the most attention. I really like to see the spectrum of the way we can get in the mind, the way we can get in the body. How does mindfulness influence mind and body? And then how does it also influence practical and realistic everyday lives of people? Mm-hmm. So across the spectrum, it's all been interesting to me. My personal work has been in the use of mindfulness training to reduce stress across different ages of the lifespan. I started out with youth, and I still do work with youth and looking at mechanisms of change. How can the disposition or change in mindfulness or mindfulness training influence youth behavior? Mm-hmm. Through stress, through depressed mood, through anger, through these things. And also, I'm interested in biological mechanisms in the body. So personally, that's what interests me, is looking at influences of the mind and the mind's communication with the body via hormones, via inflammation, and how that impacts stress outcomes. So I just finished a trial looking at mindfulness training in older adults. These older adults have insomnia symptoms, and older adults are at risk for heightened inflammation already, but lack of sleep also promotes heightened inflammation. So I wanted to see if training in mindfulness and stress reduction may improve sleep, and one of the mechanisms may be also the reduction of inflammation during that time period. So it's all very interesting to me. The body to me is kind of a new area. Everyone's focused on the mind and the brain, and that is very important and very exciting. But I also like to consider the periphery. I mean, it is called mind, body, medicine when we kind of think of the broader approach of these things. So I think a new area of investigation, and one I want to explore more, is what happens in the body when we do these things. If that's the blood, if that's how the body moves and how the brain interacts with the body, seems a very interesting venture. But there's so many good studies out there. I mean, on a big scale, they're not all great studies, but some studies across various outcomes have done a good job at really pinpointing that mindfulness training can be beneficial in various ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the interesting areas is that one study will reveal some particular aspect of the practice and how it, for example, impacts one area of our bodies. And then there's a completely different study, independent, which picks up on that particular piece and connects it to another aspect of it. So you have really a chaining of studies in understanding a full cascade of effects in seemingly unrelated studies. So I'm eager to see what the next few years bring in that sort of area.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's just so difficult once you run these trials. If you want it very nicely controlled and very clean, it takes so much energy just to get that one outcome that you're really interested in. So If we can put all those pieces together over time and build the bigger picture, it'd be really nice to see how it all functions and answer the questions of how mindfulness training functions on human health through all the different biological and psychological mechanisms.
Yeah, exactly. So, David, you had mentioned earlier about this being evidence-based, and one of the things I wanted to ask you is, what might some of the opportunities be for improving the quality of the research taking place, understanding that it's very early on in this kind of intervention and way in which we're doing the research? What are some of the opportunities we can have to grow in that?
Because in the beginning, you have to develop studies that just can basically say, it looks like mindfulness training helps on a certain outcome. Mm-hmm. So you put out those studies, and then people, of course, critique those. Then you start controlling, certain factors in a study, creating very strict designs and answering other questions that it looks like mindfulness training outperforms, at least getting attention, at least another group getting time, they're involved with something. So studies on specific outcomes have been able to show this, but there's so many types of health outcomes to look at. The evidence, when people say mindfulness training or mindfulness-based stress reduction is evidence-based, it always depends on which outcome you're talking about. Right. So if we're talking about an outcome that hasn't been fully explored, always good control conditions are what people are looking for in a good study. So you want to make sure that you have the same type of people being randomized to groups, that the people in a control condition are experiencing something that they anticipate some type of benefit from. Mm-hmm. And this is a challenge because mindfulness training is a very intensive and unique experience. So how do you recreate that with another group of people, but not give them anything that's mindfulness? And I think this is a continual question that is asked, and I don't think it's fully answered yet. Different types of controls have been used. I know some with children have been like arts and crafts. So you're engaging the children. They're exploring their selves and their body through art. So maybe that's one consideration. And I'm sure other researchers have used other techniques, but it's really trying to hone in on what type of program or treatment really reflects a mindfulness approach, but without the mindfulness.
Right.
So that's one of the most challenging things. Another thing is following people up. So after the study is done, of course, vast majority of research, and this is the case with any type of intervention study, a lot of the times it's hard to follow people up over time. So some studies have done a good job at that on specific outcomes. But the majority of the time we don't know what happens to people after they do these programs for the long term. Having follow-up periods longer than just post-intervention, but also this is going to play a big role because in adults, they have been able to successfully run some of these better designed studies. But in youth, there's just a brand new area of investigation trying to increase the strength of these studies because we really want to know, can this also benefit children? Mm-hmm. So I wrote a review of this in pediatrics back in 2009, and at that time, there were really only about 10 mindfulness training interventions with youth. And the latest review, I'm doing a follow-up to that, shows we're at 40 now. Mm-hmm. So 40 intervention studies, and that's only a couple of years, and that's a 4-fold increase. So this is an area that's growing, and it's going to face all the same types of challenges that it took over 3 decades in the adult populations. Now we're going to have 3 decades of challenges with youth, and that's going to bring a whole new realm of difficulties. What does it mean to train youth in mindfulness? What type of controls should we be using to be actively compared to some other group that receiving something that they expect is going to benefit them, but it's not mindfulness? Right. And then we may have more potential, though, to follow youth up because a lot of times we have them captive in school-based programs. Right. So we have a captive audience to follow over time. So maybe we'll be able to answer these longer follow-up questions with youth. So that's why I see a big area of research that's going to have a lot of challenges like we're talking about is probably going to be mindfulness training with youth in the coming years.
Agreed. And I think the mind-body awareness program is also doing some follow-up work on a study that they had completed fairly recently on their interventions with at-risk youth. And so I'll be looking forward to speaking with them about that. And for folks who are listening to the podcast, if you do go to the website that we're talking about today, which is mindfulexperience.org, there is a link on there, evidence-based, and it has a link in a section, Mindfulness Programs for Youth and Families, to David's study that he's talking about from 2009. And it's Sitting Meditation Interventions Among Youth, a review of treatment efficacy. So it's a review in pediatrics, and so there's a link to that there. And this is a good segue, David. I wanted to ask about some of the other sections on your site, because this one link on evidence-based for mindfulness interventions, you've got MBSR resources, MBCT resources, substance abuse program resources, and youth and families resources. So tell us a little bit about this and some of the other sections you have on the site.
So yeah, this evidence-based page is an effort to refer people to reviews and meta-analyses. Because if people usually, they contact me and they want to know, like, where's the evidence, for example, with substance use.
The
and
one
it's really,
bit of evidence.
Yeah, just in a line, give me all the evidence. And it's, like, I really can't do that. I mean, there's a big context and there's various outcomes and it's very context dependent on how the program functions. So I developed this page to allow people, if they want to get the big picture, you can go straight to the reviews, and there's various reviews for each of these outcomes and each of these programs that people can read on to get a better idea of the context of the research, because there really isn't one simple answer. Mm-hmm. So that's why I give a variety of choices here that people can look through the various reviews written to see which best kind of solidifies the answer to the question that they have. Mm-hmm. In terms of research centers, this I try to put on here to bring people together to create a bridge. I want to advance this. There's always room for advancement, and there's so many better ways of doing this. I'm in the process of making this much more interactive, so I want people to come online to be putting in their own research centers and contacts, because where this is going, where this is now is basically just places that are conducting research on mindfulness. So people, I've heard responses about this like this, because often they're looking for employment, or they're looking to connect and research, or they want to find someone who's doing mindfulness research in their state or right. near them. So that's what I hear that they use this for. But what I picture this turning into also is another way that to bridge and bring people together, and figure out what labs are doing what, and can we collaborate on research studies. So that's the research centers page. There's a measurement page. This, by the way, these pages are all in response to user feedback. Some of it was in my head, but I give most of the credit to users and their helpful feedback about what they need, because it's really a service. So it's what people want. So coming through all the emails of how do I measure mindfulness. So there are the various mindfulness measurement scales provided here in the studies that you can also link to. There's the reference we call Mindful. So this is the database that we're almost to 2,700 references now. That's pretty amazing. That 2,700 papers now have been written in reference to mindfulness, the way we conceptualize it. So people can even here, if they want to purchase the database, they can do that here. And also we have the newsletter link. So this is the most popular.
Critical piece, yes.
Yeah. So we have well over 6,000 subscribers now. I never believed that would happen. I mean, this is, to me, still a surprise. Every day we get over 100 new subscribers every month. And, I don't recruit, so I don't know where they're coming from most of the time. So a lot of time it's just word of mouth and new people joining, new people researching online, and they find it and they want to stay updated. So they join. So we have 4 volumes and 41 issues now. And the whole intent of this monthly e-newsletter, bulletin, or whatever you want to call it, this monthly publication is to increase awareness of and inform the latest advances in mindfulness. So what is the latest research coming out? And all the studies have links, so people can go straight to it, really wrap their head around it each month. I know faculty from schools have told me that they just sit down with it and have a cup of coffee when it comes out and really just try to wrap their head around the whole research realm of what's happened in the last month. And we also have a great science writer. His name's Seth Siegel. He's from Yale. And what we'll do is kind of wrap our heads around what are some of the interesting themes of the month. And we'll try to, he'll do a great job of putting that in just layman terms and making a section called highlights that kind of just brings together, in an easy to read fashion, some of the interesting themes for that month. That's pretty much what Mindfulness Research Monthly is all about.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing that. And for folks who are interested in finding out more about this or helping out, because I know there is a donate button on this page, please do consider contributing to that, because this is an invaluable resource in this collection of what is the latest peer-reviewed journal research that's being done. So the website is www.mindfulexperience.org. Our guest today has been Dr. David Black. David, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Ted, for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Today's quote is from Mark Williams, John Teasdale, Zindel Siegel, and John Kabat-Zinn's book, The Mindful Way Through Depression. For most of us, a typical day involves hurrying from task to task, forgetting that there are other possibilities for us. Even a tiny bit of mindfulness, brought to any moment, can wake us up, thus subverting the momentum of doing for at least one moment. And that's all we need to be concerned about. We don't have to stop what we are doing. We simply bring greater moment-to-moment, non-judging, wise awareness to our unfolding moments. The solution to our mood problems may not require heroic attempts to change our inner feeling world or the outer world of people, places, and jobs. Rather, it may simply involve a shift in the way we pay attention to all of them. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.